orcs are cool, and raptors are also cool. That's why I'm painting an orc riding a raptor, because combining two top tier aesthetics has got to yield some delicious fruit, right? I just can't talk about what a good combo this is without mentioning Blizzard, because I know orcs et al. Have access to raptor mounts in their games, but I'm not certain that they actually came up with the concept. Regardless, the barbarism of the orc just doesn't mix with the high society noble vibe of the horse, in my opinion. At least not naturally. Anyways, I'm spending the first bit going through and blocking in the general forms and colors for the spot illustration. I'm a self-styled fantasy illustrator, and currently, my portfolio is missing spot illustrations. So this painting here is part of a project to remedy that problem. So, I've been trying to record a process video off and on for about a year now. I actually have like 3 or 4 half-finished full illustrations that I can't bring to completion because of the fact that I'm recording them causes me to endlessly nitpick and nitpick and nitpick at the expense of the overall image. Really, that's why I'm doing this spot on camera. I knew I'd take extra time to re-render things out of a self-conscious need to look at least semi-competent, but lo and behold, this piece still took me like 10 hours to do. But I knew that going into it, and at long last, I finally have a finished piece and a video to go along with it, so hooray for that. If I had to pick the biggest self-criticism I have, it's got to be that a lot of my work looks pretty static when it comes to poses. Obviously, this is a pretty big problem, I think, when I'm trying to do fantasy, and most of the time, people look like they aren't really doing anything, or they're just kind of passively observing the world around them, with an indifference that doesn't benefit the setting. That's why I'm trying to capture some movement, action, and dynamism with this raptor jumping or pouncing, or something to that effect, while its rider hangs on with a tenacity befitting an orc in the middle of a hunt. Speaking of the orc, yeah, she's a huntress, and I did that for 2 reasons. One, I don't think I put enough women in my finished work, and two, the female form is de facto more appealing to the majority of audiences than the male form. That's just the way it is. Oh yeah, I should probably mention, I'm painting this in corelpainter 2021, and I'm using and abusing its thick paint feature set because I really like the effect. Additionally, it lets me get some free texture onto the piece for free without photo bashing or using layers to add texture on top of the image. Furthermore, you can spread and blend the pigment as well as the thickness of the pigment to get some textural elements that don't really get too repetitive, which is a pretty big upside in my opinion. On the downside, Painter tends to be really inflexible as well. I had to go from working in a billion layers in Photoshop to just 1 or 2 in Painter because blending gets weird in this program. That said, if you want to work with the thick paint brushes, then you need to use a specialized layer, and for that they do not like being manipulated. So when you see me select things and move them around and shrink them and all that, you have to flatten the image into a regular layer, and you lose all of that delicious height data, which is just a shame. And then you have to make it back into a special layer, and it sort of works, but you're never going to get that data back, the height map data, so you've really got to just paint over your mistakes as if you're working traditionally in the first place, if you want to keep your thick paint going. In a minute here, you're going to see me start livening up the colors, and I'm doing that using an overlay layer. I actually kind of regret doing this in this case because I don't usually use other blending layers in my painting, and I think in this case it made the raptor look both too metallic and too artificial, color-wise I mean. Besides, I think you can really grow to become too reliant on things like overlay and color dodge and burn to add color to your work, and that you should in most cases try to make all of the color choices for yourself, even if they're kind of bad ones, because it lets you exercise your color sensibilities. The raptor's hand things really bugged me for the duration of the painting because I have a thing where if I don't know how to paint some part of an animal, I tend to shift the anatomy towards human anatomy, which of course makes no sense, especially when you're painting a dinosaur. The problem is that there are no pictures of raptors other than their fossils, obviously, and I find it really difficult to discern where the digits are going from the pictures of the fossils because there's too little depth information. So, more or less, you just have to work from other artists' renditions of these creatures, which kind of turns it into a weird game of art telephone, where you're bouncing off of several artist interpretations and making a bit of a parody of what the real thing probably was. At the end of the day, it's not really that big of a deal for my purposes, though, because I'm doing fantasy here first and foremost, and I haven't been hired to render the most scientifically accurate dinosaur based on the most recent scientific consensus that dinosaurs were never lizards at all, and instead were autonomous, fully sentient, animate piles of feathers. I'll be honest with you, I don't vibe with the feathered dinosaur aesthetic unless you're deliberately designed to be appealing with the crests of feathers or what have you. Then they're no longer science-based anyway, so it's a bit of a moot point, I guess. One time a couple of years ago, I was watching a documentary on dinosaurs with the family on the T-Rex, and in it, David Suzuki was going off about how the T-Rex was actually probably a pack hunter, and all of these new insights into everyone's favorite dinosaur. And then he mentioned that the T-Rex was probably covered in feathers, and my dad yelled no at the top of his lungs at the screen. That's the mood right there. It's the mood that most people know when you first learn that dinosaurs probably had feathers. It's kind of like getting punched in the throat. This is, of course, yet another scenario where real life turns out to be pretty lame, and we just turn to fiction to cope with the monotony of it all. We were so close to having triple S tier aesthetic monsters in real life, and it's like, nope, enjoy your feathers, you nerd. I hate it. It makes me want to shake a stick at the sky like we did when we demoted Pluto. Pluto wasn't even doing anything wrong, it was just sitting out there hanging out, and we just dumped on it for no reason like it's Pluto's fault. It's the stellar equivalent of a manlet. Anyways, it looks like I finally got around to rendering the York out a little bit after ages of noodling around with the Raptor. You want to know why I left it for this long? Because Raptors are marginally cooler than the smelly green elves, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. Okay, this is the part where I go off script, because I couldn't be bothered to write anymore. I was already at like almost 2,000 words, and it was taking me forever to come up with new things to talk about, so now I'm just gonna watch my own video and say some things. Looks like I'm rendering out the face. It's gonna look pretty ugly for a while, just because I have to get it blocked in so I have something to, bounce off of when I start actually rendering things out. Yeah, I'm not trying to make her look particularly attractive because at the end of the day, orcs are not exactly known to be paragons of beauty. More their thing is strength and brutality most often. There's a lot of leeway when it comes to how orcs are treated in different fantasy settings. Like the orcs from the Elder Scrolls series, so Skyrim, are pretty reserved but still sophisticated as a species or race, I suppose. Whereas orcs in like Warhammer and Warhammer 40k are the exact opposite, living for nothing but bloodshed and the thrill of battle. I did some Googling after I drew this to figure out where the whole concept of the orc came from. And as far as I can tell, according to Wikipedia, they were really first popularized in their modern form by, J.R.R. Tolkien, which isn't really that much of a surprise to anybody. But according to the article, he took the idea from Beowulf, actually. And at the time, it was just the word orc was just used to refer to demonic entities or something like that. So from there, Tolkien took it, and now they're basically just super beefed up goblins, I suppose, or versions of elves that aren't quite so lame. So thank goodness for that. Oh gosh, she kind of looked for a long time like she had scavenged the wrong kind of mushroom from the forest floor, didn't she? Well, thankfully, I'm coming back to re-render it, which I'll do several more times before we're done. Same thing with her hands. Hands are always going to be hard. I don't think you can really practice hands long enough to just get them right on the first go. Maybe you can, but I don't know if I'll ever get to that level. Don't worry about her forearm length. I will shorten them back down. I'm aware that they're out of perspective. Or not out of perspective, out of proportion. Because right now, if she was to like lower her arms, or her knuckles would be like at her knees, which is a bit too a bit too troll like for what an orc is. Is essentially they're just like normal people, but they're green and really buff. So a lot of the painting I'm doing, like the vast majority of what I'm doing, is with the brush called, I think it's thick paint, um, grainy knife, or grainy texture, heavy texture knife. It's heavy texture knife, and it really puts a lot of depth into the painting, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, because like when you're trying to do little details, it tends to break down. So for that reason, you use the other brushes, like the uh, thick, the heavy oil brush, or the thick oil brush. That's what I use a lot. And the coarse oily blender, because you can actually make it compatible with thick paint, so it'll like smear around the thickness as well as the color, which is really good. So since this is a spot illustration, I'm not going to be doing too much in the way of a background. I'm really just going to be hinting at it through positive and negative shapes. Because, like I said, my portfolio is filled to the brim with full on illustrations, and spot illustrations are important too. Because if you own like any like tabletop RPG books, there's a lot of spot illustrations in those for like, oh, here's your, potion of healing, and there's like a little illustration of it. Oh, here's your, you know, sword and board, or or like an illustration of the dice. Like they're just kind of free floating among the text. So it's super important, in my opinion, that I get some of that in my portfolio, because otherwise people just aren't going to think I can do that or want to do that. And the truth is, I do want to do that. Yeah, I just signed it. I thought I was done, but I went and looked at the footage afterwards, and I saw a whole bunch of issues that I wanted to fix. And that's another good tip, honestly. If you can, if your computer can handle it, you should record your drawing sessions and then speed them up and play them back, because I find it very, very valuable. Because you kind of see the mistakes you're making in real time before you can cover it up with good rendering. So you can go back in and fix structural issues that you might have been completely blind to before, even if you're doing the flip thing where you flip it horizontally over and over again to look for inconsistencies in structure and pose and all of that. So I decided to change her hair to make it more flowy, because I think the bun did not lend itself to I think the general feel of the character, and it also wasn't doing anything for me when it came to movement. And I really want to make sure it looks like they're falling down after like pouncing on something. So in the end, I'm pretty happy with the way I do the hair there. Um, I do add little like colorful tassel things to her spear, because you kind of have to do a little bit of world building when you're drawing like this, because you have to think like, oh, you're hunting on a raptor, right? Why would you even need to like have a spear if you got a raptor? Well, that's why you turn it into a javelin, so now it kind of makes sense, because a raptor doesn't have a ranged attack, right? But if you have a javelin, that remedies that. And then you're probably going to want to have a way to find it once it gets into the thick underbrush of a jungle, so you just add some brightly colored tassels on the back, and hopefully that's enough to sell the idea that this is something that you throw and then find later. Going through, re-rendering her legs, render out her feet. If you say anything weird about her feet in the comments, I will exercise my right to mute you. Please make sure that all comments about feet are edifying to God. Thank you. I'm going back, noodling around with the Raptor's claws again, because, like I said, once you rewatch the video in hyperspeed, you can really see that certain things just don't stand up to the rest of the rendering effort you've put into the piece. So you should definitely do that if you can. It's a good trick. Um, in a moment here, I'm gonna just do a little bit more lighting work, and then I'm gonna call this piece done, which is super exciting because this is the first time, like I said, I've ever finished a piece on record. Well, not on record, but like while recording. That's what I mean to say. So if you enjoyed this video, I'm not gonna bother you to like and subscribe or anything, but I would appreciate it if you look at the rest of my portfolio, or if you follow me on Instagram, or if you checked out my website. That would be really cool. If you have any projects that have to do with this kind of illustration, I would love to help, especially if there's like a royalty deal involved or something like that. And lastly, I do have signed prints available through my website. Or just contact me and we can work something out. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching. Peace out.